love, she is fairer than the red rose in bloom. She is loved by a young man that does grieve me. There's a heart in my bosom for lovely Mary. When Willie and Mary went down by Unshady Bower, where Willie and Mary spent many's the happy hour, where the blackbirds and thrushes do concert and chorus the praises of Mary and love fair and sure.
In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution meant that Britain was one of the world's leading manufacturers. Every day, new machines were invented, and new factories, mills, and shipyards were being built. Industrial towns grew rapidly as people came flooding in from the country to find work. Many of them in shipyards like this one. There were many industrial towns in Britain, like Liverpool, Glasgow, and Manchester, but few in Ireland. Belfast was the biggest, and in the 1800s, it became the fastest growing industrial town in the British Isles. Most of the rest of Ireland was still an agricultural society, but Ulster was changing dramatically in economic terms, and this change had a huge effect on the political situation. Now, the whole issue of home rule was being played out in the political arena. Then, as today, power was about wealth. Who had it, and who didn't? It was the wealthy industrialists who had the power, most of whom were Protestant. They believed that they had become wealthy by being at the heart of the British Empire. They were against home rule and believed in the union with Britain, so they were called Unionists. They thought that if Ireland got home rule, then other parts of the empire would want the same, and the whole empire would break up. In the 18th century, Belfast was a small port at the mouth of the River Lagan, with a population of 20,000. Industry was tiny, and most people still earned their living by farming. Many farmers made extra money by weaving linen. Linen cloth had been made in Ulster for centuries by people in their homes. First, you have to sow the flaxseed, the linseed. You plough and harrow the land and then scatter the seed. When the plant is ready for harvesting, the workers pull the flax. It's a sore job. The seeds are removed and the beats of the flax are lowered into a dam. That's for retting or rotting. The women spun the yarn and then the weaver wove it into linen on a hand loom. The fabric was then sold at markets. It was the merchants who made most profit. Industry began to draw people in from their homes in the country and put them to work in the city. People flocked into Belfast to work in the mills and the factories, and they lived in houses nearby, just like these. Huge mills for spinning linen yarn were built, complete with noisy steam engines to power the spindles. Factories with tall chimneys dominated the landscape. Some were built close to the docks where the factory owners could import the coal they need to power the steam machines. Some were built by rivers and streams or on the outskirts of towns. Belfast churned out bales of linen to be distributed all over the world. And as the machines improved, the people making linen in their own homes had to work harder and harder.
Weaver at home can earn from 2 shillings and sixpence to 4 shillings and sixpence in a whole week. It will not support a mere weaver, let alone a whole family. Weavers are sitting up 3 nights a week in order to procure food for their families. I've seen them at 2 in the morning, working as busily as in the daytime, often compelled by exhaustion to lie down.
But most weavers left their homes for work in the mills. New model villages sprang up around the mills, like Sion Mills. By 1850, 100,000 people lived in Belfast, crowded into red brick streets, huddled under mill stacks. The houses were damp and stuffy. They did not have flushing toilets and running water like today. Sometimes a whole family slept in one bed. Their diet was tea and white bread 3 times a day. Conditions at the mill were no better. They worked long hours and were poorly paid, and working in the mill was dangerous.
On Saturday, a woman, Sarah Jane Quinn, a worker at the mill in York Street, sustained a very severe accident. She was engaged at the carding part of the machinery, and her hair became entangled in the machinery, in which the greater part of her scalp was removed from the head and the skull injured. Little hope is entertained for her recovery.
Sarah Jane Quinn was only one of many. The damp, humid atmosphere meant that lung and skin diseases were common in the mills. Mill workers died young.
When they reach about 30 years old, the appearance of the flax worker begins to change. Their face begins to get an anxious look. The shoulders begin to get rounded. In fact, they become prematurely aged, and most of them die before they reach the age of 45 years old.
Belfast is a Gaelic name, Belferste. It means the mouth of the sandbanks. That is why the harbour wasn't suitable for large ships. But as industrial Belfast grew, so did the need for better transport. This meant they needed a decent harbour. In 1849, a newly dredged deep channel, the Victoria Channel, was opened. It allowed ships to sail straight into the heart of Belfast. Larger quays were built to take the big ships, bringing coal for the factories. Ships also took the new goods being made in Belfast to its main market, England. Ships had been built in Belfast for centuries, small ships. But now with the deep water port, the iron and engine works and cheap land, Belfast became ideal for shipbuilding. A young Englishman saw his chance. His name was Edward Harland. He bought a small shipyard, and he found a business partner from Liverpool called Gustav Wolff. Together, the two men founded one of the world's biggest shipbuilding firms, Harland and Wolff. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Edward Harland was born in 1831. When he came to the Belfast shipyards to work, he cut wages, banned smoking and brought in workers from the Clyde when the men went on strike. He found a partner, Gustav Wolff, and with money from Wolff's uncle, they bought the shipyard. They led the world in technology and ship design. Harland had the good business head and engineering genius. Wolff had the financial brain. Harland involved himself in public life, while Gustav became a partner in the Belfast Ropework Company. Harland became mayor of Belfast in 1885. Wolff said, "I had no idea when I came to Belfast in 1858 I would be a permanent citizen. I have no regrets. I stayed."
Ships were big business, and Britain was in competition with the rest of Europe to build liners, the biggest moving man-made object in the world. The rich sailed the world in style on luxury liners, while the poor crowded the immigration ships sailing to America. By 1914, Harland and Wolff employed 14,000 people and were the biggest single employers in Belfast. The yard used the latest technology in shipbuilding, first in iron and then in steel. They built ships for the White Star Line in Liverpool. In 1899, they built the liner, the Oceanic. At that time, it was the largest ship ever built in the world. Perhaps the best-known ship to be built by Harland and Wolff was the Titanic. journal The Shipbuilder claimed she was unsinkable. On the 10th of April 1912, she sailed on her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York. On the 14th of April, she struck a huge iceberg, and 2.5 hours later, she sank. Only 711 of the 2,201 passengers survived. The new factories needed new machines, and the shipyards needed huge turbine engines to power the ships. Another industry flourished in Belfast: engineering. Power looms were needed to produce millions of yards of linen. Boilers were needed to make steam to power these machines, and it was cheaper to make them in Belfast than it was to import them. By the 1900s, Belfast had the largest shipyard, the largest linen mill, largest rope works, and the largest tobacco factory in the world. The workers who moved to Belfast were both Protestant and Catholic. They settled on the roads they came in on and lived in different areas of town. By 1831, a third of the population of Belfast was Catholic. The two communities had good relations, but as competition for jobs increased, good relations suffered. From time to time, trouble would flare up between them. Protestants had the better and more skilled jobs. Few Catholics were employed in the shipyards. Rioting was common, as were all the elements of sectarian violence that we are all too familiar with. Ulster had always been different from the rest of Ireland because of the number of Protestants living there. Now, the economic links with Britain added to that difference. The Protestants looked east to industrial Britain, the English royal family, and the British Empire. In the rest of rural Ireland, Catholics were locked in a struggle against bad landlords and high rents. A land league was set up to force the landlords to charge fairer rents. They were nationalists who wanted to be free of landlords, free from England. They wanted an Irish parliament. They wanted home rule. But some members of the Land League took matters into their own hands. This was the Land War.
You hear me, Gibbon Crawford? It's the Sergeant warning! Next time, Captain Death!
Most people lived off the land owned by landlords. It was a hand-to-mouth existence, until landlords in Donegal decided that they could make more money by keeping sheep on the land instead of people. In Glenveigh, the landlord, Mr. Adair, brought in 200 police and ruthlessly evicted the families that lived there.
The bereaved widow and her daughters were frantic with despair, throwing themselves on the ground that became almost insensible, and bursting out in the old Irish wail, her terrifying cries resounding along the mountainside for many miles. There these poor, starving people remain, on the cold, bleak mountains, no one caring for them whether they live or die. It is horrible to think of, but more horrible to behold.
Such awful scenes were common. Many believed that the only way to make life better was to let the Irish people make their own laws, have their own parliament. This was a nationalist belief. The British Prime Minister, Gladstone, set out to solve the land problem. He introduced the 1881 Land Act, which guaranteed a fair rent for tenants.
William Ewart Gladstone was born in Liverpool in 1809. He went to Eton and then to Oxford, where he chose politics rather than the church. His favourite hobby was cutting down trees. He was Prime Minister 4 times. He was elected to Parliament in 1832 as a Conservative, but in 1859 he joined the Liberals. He became Prime Minister in 1868. He battled to establish peace in Ireland. "My mission is to pacify Ireland," he said. He was a strong supporter of Home Rule. He was a leading symbol of the reforming trends of the Victorian age. He resigned as Prime Minister in 1894 and retired. He died of cancer, aged 88, and was buried in Westminster Abbey.
The Unionists were afraid of Home Rule. For them, Home Rule was Rome Rule. When Protestants heard that the Home Rule Bill had been defeated in Westminster, they began to celebrate. Orange bands played and bonfires were lit. Some Catholic pubs were attacked. The rioting went on for weeks and about 50 people were killed. You see, the present conflict in Ireland is not just as a result of religious or even political differences. Economic factors also play a part. And the economic development of Belfast in the 19th century, the business of money and of making money, played an important part in creating the big splits at the centre of today's problems. The split between Catholic nationalist and Protestant unionist. The split between North and South.
Oh dear me, the mill's getting fast. The pair of wee shifters, can we get the rest? Shifting bobbins, course and time, the fairly might you work for your time. Oh dear me, I wish the day was done, running up and down the past is made fun, shifting piece and spinning, warp, weft and twine, the